Welcome to Veterans Creed, the channel where bravery, sacrifice, and honor come alive. Here, we share the untold stories of heroes, the lessons of courage, and the spirit that defines true veterans. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we honor the legends and uncover the stories that... The flight hadn't even reached cruising altitude when the first whisper sliced through the calm like a paper cut's maul, almost invisible but sharp enough to sting. She heard it before she saw the looks. It always started the same way, a glance, a nudge, a half-hidden gesture that wasn't as hidden as people thought. She sat in the wide leather seat of first class, angled slightly toward the window, hoping the world outside would be more peaceful than the one inside the cabin. Clouds drifted below in thick white layers, soft and quiet, nothing like the atmosphere surrounding her row. She could feel eyes on her, judging, measuring, doubting. She had boarded early, quietly, with nothing but a worn backpack slung over one shoulder and a boarding pass she'd bought with her own money. No upgrades, no special treatment. She didn't want any. All she wanted was a seat, a moment of stillness, maybe a chance to breathe somewhere above the noise, but she'd learned long ago, peace rarely traveled with her. The whispers grew louder. Must be a mistake. She doesn't look like she belongs in first class. Probably snuck in. They let anyone up here now. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. 10 years of discipline, of missions in places too dark for the world to acknowledge, had trained her to ignore worse things than gossip. She could endure this. She'd endured far more. Still, the sting of unfairness never completely faded, not after everything she had done, not after everything she had given up. The flight attendant approached, a polite smile stretched thin across her face like plastic pulled too tight. Something about the way she clutched the tablet in her hand told the woman everything she needed to know. Someone had complained, probably more than one someone. "Ma'am," the attendant said softly, leaning in with a voice that pretended to be kind, "could I see your boarding pass again?" There it was. She pulled the crumpled pass from her pocket and handed it over. The attendant scanned it, frowned, scanned it again. "Seat 2A. The attendant swallowed. "It appears there may be an error in the system. I'm very sorry, but I'll need you to come with me. There's been a seating issue." A seating issue. That was a polite airline translation for someone doesn't like how you look. The woman's jaw tightened. For a moment, a flicker of hurt crossed her eyes. Not anger, not indignation, just that quiet ache that came from being judged before being understood. She didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that people only saw what they wanted to see. She stood slowly, her movements calm and controlled, the kind of grace that didn't come from training in etiquette, but from training in survival. Passengers watched her rise, some with sneers, others with smug satisfaction, convinced justice had been served. One man in a suit smirked as she stepped past him. "Knew it," he murmured under his breath. Another woman pulled her purse closer, as if proximity to her was somehow dangerous. The humiliation was sharp, but she accepted it. She always did. She followed the attendant back toward economy, feeling the heat of stairs burning into her back. Her shoulders were relaxed, not in defeat, but in the calm of someone who had walked through far more threatening corridors in foreign countries where every shadow carried a weapon. But then it happened, the moment everything changed. She shifted slightly to adjust the strap of her backpack. Her jacket slipped just an inch, only an inch, but it was enough. Gasps erupted behind her. A sudden silence fell like an anchor dropped into water, because etched across her upper back, exposed for the first time, was the unmistakable symbol, the SEAL Trident, sharp, bold, permanent, not bought. Not borrowed, earned. The same passengers who had mocked her, who had rolled their eyes and whispered about people like her, fell into silence so heavy it felt like the air had been vacuumed from the cabin. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift, the shock, the regret, the fear. The truth had spoken louder than any defense she could have given, and the flight had only just begun. The aisle had never felt longer, but she walked it with the same steady rhythm she used on midnight patrols across uneven, dangerous ground. Each step was controlled, deliberate. There was no rush, no shame, no faltering. Only the heavy quiet that followed in her wake. Behind her, whispers ricocheted through the cabin like shocked little echoes. "That's a SEAL Trident, for real, no way. Women can't. She must be one of the special operators. Dude, don't stare. She'll hear you." She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Their stares pressed into her spine like heat from an open flame. The flight attendant leading her stumbled over her own thoughts as they walked. She kept glancing over her shoulder, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and guilt. The Trident had clearly rattled her more than any passenger complaint ever had, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the woman being escorted down the aisle had learned, over years of silence, not to fight every injustice. Sometimes people needed to see the consequences of their assumptions on their own. They reached economy, where a narrow row had been cleared for her. The attendant gestured stiffly. "If you could, please, sit here for now." We're, still checking the issue. The issue. Right, she nodded once and sat down without a word. The passengers nearby looked at her with open curiosity. Not judgment now. Something closer to awe. One teenage boy leaned forward, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Ma'am, was that a real Navy SEAL tattoo?" he whispered, like asking if she were a superhero. She didn't answer, not out of rudeness but discipline. Some truths weren't meant for open cabins at 30,000 feet. Instead, she leaned back, rested her head against the seat, and closed her eyes, trying once again to find some peace in a world that constantly misjudged her. But silence didn't last long. A shadow appeared beside her aisle seat. Heavy, hesitant, she opened her eyes. The businessman from first class, the same man who had smirked when she was escorted out, now stood before her, face pale. He swallowed hard before speaking. I owe you an apology," he stammered, voice barely audible over the low hum of the engine. "I didn't realize who you were." Her gaze lifted slowly, steady and focused. "You don't have to know who I am to treat me with respect," she replied quietly. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sharp, but it struck him harder than a slap. He stepped back, shame washing over him like cold water, and retreated without another word. More passengers shifted, whispering, glancing, pretending not to stare but failing miserably. Some were embarrassed. Some were impressed. Some were intimidated. All were suddenly aware that the woman they had judged at a glance had lived through battles they couldn't imagine. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had moved her hovered near the galley, biting her lip. She kept checking the manifest, tapping nervously on the screen. She knew she'd made a mistake, a big one, and the realization was growing heavier with each passing second. Finally, she approached again. "Ma'am," she said in a smaller, more human voice, "I'm incredibly sorry. We're still trying to sort things out. Would you like some water? Anything at all?" Before she could answer, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the pilot's voice, steady but with a strange tremor underneath, "we'll be stepping out into the aisle for a brief moment." A pilot stepping into the cabin mid-flight without turbulence or emergency. That almost never happened. Every head turned toward the cockpit door. It opened slowly, and the pilot emerged, not with professional calm, but with wide, stunned eyes locked directly on her. He didn't look at the attendants. He didn't look at the manifest. He looked at her exposed tattoo, just barely visible under her jacket, and stopped dead in his tracks. The cabin went silent again, deeper, heavier, as though everyone felt something bigger than all of them unfolding in real time. The pilot cleared his throat, but his voice wavered. "Excuse me, ma'am, would you mind standing?" Gasps fluttered through the rows. What was happening? Why was the pilot addressing her? She rose slowly. The pilot's expression changed. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You." He breathed, unable to finish the sentence. Something told every passenger watching that this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something none of them would forget. For a moment, no one moved. Not the passengers holding their breaths, not the flight attendants hovering nervously near the galley, and certainly not the pilot, frozen in front of her like he had just seen a ghost walking the aisle. His eyes remained locked on the SEAL Trident barely visible beneath her jacket. But it wasn't just the symbol he recognized. It was the story behind it. The kind of story whispered in military circles, documented only in redacted files, and spoken about with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He swallowed hard, stepped closer, then paused, as if approaching someone dangerous or deeply respected. "Ma'am," he said again, voice low, "I believe we've met, though not formally." A ripple of confusion ran through the cabin. She held his gaze, calm and steady. "Afghanistan, FOB Kestrel," he continued, his voice tightening with emotion. "You were the one who got us out. When the convoy was ambushed." The cabin gasped in unison. A flash of memory crossed her eyes. Dust, smoke, screams, the sudden burst of gunfire cracking against the armored convoy. She remembered dragging wounded soldiers behind cover, calling air support with a radio half broken, and leading a counter-assault that had saved dozens of lives. She remembered the pilot too, not his face, but his voice, trembling over the comms as he guided his helicopter through enemy fire to evacuate the last of the wounded. "I was just doing my job," she murmured. The pilot shook his head fiercely. "You saved my life. You saved the entire team." His voice cracked. "I never knew who you were. They never told us your name. Just that a SEAL operator took command when everything went to hell." The passengers stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. The woman they had mocked, judged, and pushed aside had once stood between life and death for strangers in a world far from this comfortable cabin. He turned to the nearest attendant, his tone suddenly sharp with authority. "Put her back in first class, immediately." The attendant nodded, cheeks burning with shame, but the woman raised a hand, stopping them. "No," her voice was calm but firm, "I'm fine here." "But," the attendant began. She shook her head. "I didn't come onto this plane to be treated differently. I came to get home, same as everyone else." Her humility hit the cabin harder than her tattoo ever could. A mother in the aisle seat wiped a tear from her cheek. The businessman, who had smirked earlier, now stared at the floor, wishing he could disappear. The teenage boy from the row beside her looked like he had just witnessed a scene out of a war film come to life. The pilot took a breath, steadying himself. "If not first class," he said gently, "then at least accept our apology." She met his gaze, saw genuine remorse there, and nodded once. Apology accepted. The tension in the cabin finally eased, but something deeper replaced it. Respect, reverence, and a heavy awareness that they had misjudged her from the start. The pilot stepped back, but before returning to the cockpit, he said, "If you ever need anything on this flight, anything at all, we're here for you." She nodded again as he disappeared behind the cockpit door. Then, slowly, quietly, passengers began approaching her. The businessman was first. With trembling hands, he extended a bottle of water. I shouldn't have judged you. I'm sorry." She accepted the water with a polite smile. Next came the mother from across the aisle, her pink-cheeked daughter hiding behind her. "My husband served," she whispered. "Thank you for everything you've done." The girl peeked out and shyly offered a small drawing she had made on the in-flight notepad. A stick figure soldier with a cape. For the first time since boarding, the woman felt warmth bloom in her chest. The teenage boy leaned forward, voice cracking with excitement. "You're like a real-life superhero." She chuckled softly. "Just someone who did her job." More passengers whispered their thanks, more apologized. The humiliation from earlier faded beneath a wave of genuine gratitude. And for once, she let herself feel it, the recognition, the appreciation, the understanding that someone finally saw her for who she truly was. As the engines hummed steadily and the flight settled into calm, she leaned back in her seat. Not with tension, but with peace. Outside the window, the clouds stretched endlessly beneath her, soft and glowing under the sunlight. A quiet reminder that even above the world, where judgment was swift and appearances deceived, truth still had the power to rise. And on that flight, every single witness had learned a lesson they would never forget. Respect isn't given based on appearances. It's earned through the battles no one else sees.